Hello, I'm Chris Hills, Technical Director at Phaedrus Systems. I'm here with Felix Redmill, the author of Software Projects, Evolutionary versus Big Bang Delivery. Now, Felix, what's your background in software engineering and project management? When did you first get involved?
This goes back a long way. I was first a programmer in Agile right back in 1968 with the post office, which was then BT. Well, it's the other way around actually. It's BT now, it became BT, it was the post office at that time. Mm-hmm. I joined as an engineer and I started as an Agile programmer, worked my way to becoming a systems analyst, designing not systems exactly, but parts of systems. Mm-hmm. I then went back into engineering, and in the early 80s, I was in charge of a department programming, or not, well, actually designing and programming systems for telecommunications. And I was, I guess you'd say, a development engineer, alternating with project manager for a number of years.
What led you to write this book in the first place?
Well, in the early 1980s, my team and I were having problems with users, customers, and the problems were the typical problems of the time, in that people didn't know what computers could do. So there was great difficulty in specifying. But in addition to that, there was the problem, which is quite familiar to people like us, that of the Big Bang delivery, the so-called waterfall model. And so I realized that the large systems that we were developing required iterative development so that we could interact more with the users, so-called, and the customers, who I distinguish from users because I want to distinguish the people who specify the systems from the people who use them.
So what made you actually decide to write a book?
Well, I was coming to that, but we decided to try incremental delivery, evolutionary delivery, as those names were alternated in those days, with us anyway. And we hadn't realized the problems that we were going to encounter in implementing these techniques, this method. And we had to design, we had to overcome the difficulties that the method posed for us by designing methods, techniques, and so on. And so at the end of it, by the end of the 1980s, I decided that I would write a book on it. In fact, about that time, just after that, in 1990, I left the company. And so with the changes in my own life, I was deterred from writing at that time. But later on, in the 90s, I wrote, and the book was eventually published in 1997.
Is it still relevant? Have the fundamentals of software project management changed, or is it just project management?
I think it's as relevant now as it was then, and perhaps it's even more relevant because so-called Agile techniques, which developed from the kind of work that I was doing, are now being put about as the way to go. And it may be so, I don't know, but certainly I think a book like mine, which highlights the problems that are thrown up by this way of working, don't seem to be known to the Agile agilistas, as they refer to themselves as. They don't seem to be aware. Whenever I ask them at conferences, whenever I read articles, I don't see the kinds of problems that I have outlined being mentioned at all. They don't seem to know how to deal with them. So I would say that anybody using Agile would find my book useful.
You talk about evolutionary rather than agile, as your book's written a few years before the Agile Manifesto. Would you say that evolutionary is the same as agile, or is it something different?
I don't know enough. I haven't had any first-hand experience of programming using agile techniques or methods. in the last few years. So what I know of Agile is that it has come about through a number of different so-called techniques, extreme programming, Agile. So these have evolved into Agile, or they have just been called Agile. And what I wrote about is, that's the name that we gave it, evolutionary. Sometimes we called it incremental delivery. So yes, I suppose it's pretty much the same, or even if it's not the same, the problems that I found from using an evolutionary technique must be the same sorts of problems that would have to be overcome in using Agile.
Are you planning another book, or doing a revised edition of this book? Or do you have enough to do with being editor, in fact founding editor of the Safety Critical Systems Club newsletter, which is about to start its 25th year?
Well, the newsletter certainly gives me a lot of work. I wouldn't say it fills my time entirely, but in answer directly to your question, no, I'm not thinking of another book at the moment, and I don't think I need to revise this one. It throws up enough that seems not to have been known to get on with for a while.
Right, thank you very much, Felix. That's a fascinating insight into your career and how you came to write this book and why it's still relevant today for most readers.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.